Hello, my name is Susi Long. I am a mother, a teacher educator at the University of South Carolina, and I come to you to speak to you today representing myself and not my institution. And I want to start out before I forget, just to pick up on what was just mentioned, that there's no mention of banning anything in these bills. And actually, there's a huge mention of oversight for the materials that teachers will use and the lessons that they can teach. And that will lead down the slippery slope to banning, which we're well aware of. So that's something to be aware of. Also, you can't just make up definitions of CRT. I mean, I can't even imagine my grad students, my undergrad students, if they tried to write about a theory and they made it up and they didn't cite who originated it, they wouldn't get credit for their work. So how can you pass a bill that it has made up definitions of CRT, which we've proven over and over today, have those little tenets they're non-existent tenets in the world of CRT. But the bottom line is we have amazing teachers in South Carolina. They've studied their craft as scholars dedicated to educating young thinkers who will one day help to change the world. However, the proposed legislation indicates that there is a lack of trust in educators' abilities to utilize their expertise to make decisions about the materials they'll use and the lessons they teach. Just as worrisome, they're being asked to narrow the breadth of their teaching with a kind of oversight that brings fear into the profession and unprecedented monitoring. Second, we should be clear, and I think we are clear by now, that this debate is wrapped up in misinformation about CRT, created in attempts to eliminate the holistic teaching of history and current events and to shut down any teaching about race and racism and anti-racism, and that's not okay. As others have mentioned in their own histories, as a white child, I learned virtually nothing in school about race and racial histories. I grew up thinking that Africa was a place of thatched huts and poor babies. I was one of those white people who thought we checked racism off the to-do list with the civil rights movement, while anti-racist protests were occurring not 4 miles from my schools, where nothing was mentioned about them in my classrooms. My own mother told me how enslaved people loved sitting around their campfires, evoking a sense that everything was really okay. So where was I going to learn otherwise? Yes, a more accurate view of history might have made me uncomfortable. But as an early childhood educator, I can tell you, disequilibrium, a kind of discomfort, is something we go through on the way to learning something new. How to ride a bike, how to speak a language. It's that place on the way to learning how to solve a problem with the support of knowledgeable teachers. And that brings us to this question: whose discomfort are we worried about? Is it the white student who may learn the history of enslavement or current events, or is it the black student who lives through 12 years of schooling without learning the histories, resistance, and resilience of their people beyond one designated month of the year, or who sits through schooling that ignores current events regarding race, receiving messages about who and what matters? Finally, this legislation denies the efforts of civil rights workers, black, brown, and white, who fought for all of us. The bottom line is that there's nothing to fear in the work to teach for a stronger humanity. All of us, our young students included, feel a sense of calm when we have a space to explore current events and build the historical knowledge necessary to work toward a better tomorrow. To do less means we're less of a democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Long. Dr. Long, knowing that you are in higher ed and have such a great opportunity and probably challenge some when it comes to teaching the future teachers of our state, do you feel after sitting here today and listening to the questions and the testimony that has been had, do you think that there is an opportunity for higher ed and the teachers in our K through 12 system and parents to learn something from this?
I think you all could learn something from us, actually, because I think we have good systems in place. The kinds of things you have in these tenets, we would never teach pre-service teachers to teach to children or older students in schools. It's not a part of what we do and what we teach. So I think maybe listening to what we actually do teach and the brilliance of our young teachers that come out of our programs and the way they stop and engage students in conversations about important and critical issues would be really enlightening for all of you.
Representative Oremus.
Hey, I'm over here. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Tampa, Florida.
Okay. Not that that really matters, but our education system's a little different in South Carolina. And I think what we do here is we allow the different districts to kind of come up and formulate their curriculum. That's kind of how we've talked about it here today. My question for you is, do you feel like what we're currently teaching has been a disservice to our students currently, how it is?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, I've been here for 25 years, and I've worked with districts in developing curriculum and all kinds of things for a long time. So I'm really familiar with the system here in South Carolina, particularly here in the Columbia area. But I do think that the curriculum that we teach definitely needs a broadening. You know, our center is pretty narrow in terms of who is normalized, what histories are normalized in our curriculum, and what do we just learn about during Black History Month or Native American History Month or Hispanic Heritage Month. And so I think those are places that we can really work to broaden what we do.
And I think that most everybody up here would agree with you that there's so much history that is not currently being taught. Not one of us up here is interested in canceling any kind of history from our history books. And I hope that everyone that is against these bills are listening to what we're saying. None of us wants to cancel a field trip. None of us wants to cancel any kind of Black history. If there is Black history out there that we are currently not being taught,
We want to teach it.
we want it, and we want to hear it. Those are part of our standards and stuff that we need to hear. And when you get angry about us changing the definition of CRT, what we're saying is the theory that was developed in the law school is not what we're talking about now. We're
But that
talking
is
about
what's in
the
the bill.
snowball, excuse me, let me finish. The snowball effect is what's got the parents up in arms. That's who's reaching out to us right now. It's not the scholars who developed this and where we're coming from. It's what it's come into. And yes, we don't want our teachers scared of what they're teaching and the curriculum that they're putting forward. We would never want that. We're saying we need to broaden it and lose the perspective that one person is supreme over that. And you can say it was a white supremacy thing that led to slavery. Nobody is denying that. Nobody is saying that. What we're saying is we want to lose that perspective of you need to feel a certain way and you need to evoke your white privilege over here. Our kids do not need to be bothered with that. And I think we've said that to repetition ad nauseum, and I do not like to be told that we need to be taught something because of A, B, C, or D through your eyes. We are hearing from our constituents who are saying something very, very different.
I'm a constituent.
I got you. But I'm just letting you know, other than an educator's perspective, who is saying this is not being taught, we have examples of where it is being taught. That snowball definition that nobody can seem to define, we are trying to address that. And like we've all said up here, we have to get to the bottom of what has these parents upset, but we can't ignore it. And that's what you guys are saying, that we've got to ignore that. We, just got to move on. And nobody wants to cancel Black history. I can tell you that. I would never preach that or teach that in my household. And I just want everybody to know that. Not one person up here I would ever think is a racist. And if they are, I would never want to serve with them. So I just want to get that out there. But it is getting infuriating hearing that over and over of how you need to do this, you need to do that. We are listening, but we also want you to know we would never do anything to hurt our children or their education.
Well, we appreciate your listening. One of the things that I did realize is that were sprinkled among you some people that really knew a little bit about CRT, and a lot of people that really thought it was according to the tenets, of these. And that's very dangerous. If you pass these bills, that's saying, yes, we believe that this is what CRT is, and it isn't. So that's not okay to pass them in that way. The other thing is, and I'm so grateful that you want to look at a broadened perspective on what our curriculum can look like. At the same time, the very nature and the wording of these bills leads itself open to interpretation and through implementation that could be really dangerous and scary. And I think that's something that I would really appreciate it if you would think about as you move forward with this work.
And Dr. Long, I am sure that that will be, because we have a long way to go. And Representative McDaniel has a question.
Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, actually, I'm not, since he bothered me down here on this end. I want to thank you so much. Just like the young student, you've also uncovered what we're doing here. And when I asked Representative May the definition of CRT, he expressly said it was those tenets. He said that was the definition. So, I mean,
It's not.
that's exactly what he said.
But so if he wrote that in a paper in my class, I'd have to say, please go back and read the history of CRT and find out exactly what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And so there are those of us here who believes that our time would be better spent talking about the $400, $600, $500 million that we're sending over to the rural infrastructure where we have these small communities competing for grants to do things that we already know we need to do, while we're sitting here putting something in place that the majority of the people, at least that I've heard from, and the majority of the people in the audience feels that it's something we should not even be talking about.
Right.
And I agree with you, do you know, totally, that interpretation means a lot. And we're starting
Yes.
something that is really going to it's not could be, it's going to snowball into something crazy. Our teachers, who we all love so dearly, and we know they're getting burned out, between teachers and healthcare professionals, I don't know where we're going to be in the future. And if we continue to do things to cause them not to go into the profession, then I hope I don't be one of the ones that go to the emergency room or have a child that goes to a classroom and they don't have a teacher, because we putting so many things in place that have fear, that have caused them fear.
Exactly.
And they don't want to teach. So thank you for your perspective. It was very great. And continue talking to us and continue following us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Morgan. Let's move along. Representative Morgan, did you have a question? Okay.
Hopefully it's a quick one. You mentioned anti-racism directly, and you said that we needed a robust discussion. Are you talking about in K through 12 that we need a robust discussion of anti-racism?
Yes.
Which is that's one of the tenets that's listed, that individuals by virtue of sex, race, ethnicity, religion are implicitly racist, sexist, oppressive, whether consciously and unconsciously, and that they support oppressive systems because of that unconscious racism. That in K through 12, we need to be teaching that.
No, we don't need to be teaching that.
Okay, sorry,
The so-called tenet that you just read.
Well, that is what the core of anti-racism is, that people are unconsciously
Read that one
racist
more
and-
time.
Well, the tenet that's listed, which is why it's included, it is the anti-racist tenet. Individuals by virtue of race, sex, ethnicity, religion, color, national origin are inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. And then a related one is that they support these oppressive institutions implicitly and by accident or unconsciously.
But it's not anti-racism to
No,
teach that
that's-
somebody's inherently racist.
Gentlemen,
That doesn't make sense.
Yes, ma'am.
I have Representative Henderson Myers.
Well, sorry, what was your answer to that?
No, I just said
She
it's,
said-
it's not it's not the definition of anti-racism to teach that certain people are inherently racist. It's the opposite of that. It's
No, the
racist.
anti-racism includes that tenet. I mean, that's what I would encourage you, this is my opinion, as an educator, to look into what anti-racism is, read some of the books about it. I'm serious, to understand what the concepts are, because, and I understand it is an interesting theory, and maybe at college level, absolutely it should be discussed and argued about and papers written. But K through 12, I think it's inappropriate. I think most parents in the state of South Carolina
Well,
also
let me
think
just
that.
tell you one little early childhood thing. We know that young children learn about and recognize race from the youngest ages. And also someone mentioned earlier that if African-American children have to experience racism at 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, our white children are not too young to be able to talk about it and take a role in being able to affect change. And in fact, they feel better when they know they can have a conversation about it and they can play a role in change.
But anti-racism is talking about specifically unconscious racism that those kids have by nature of their race.
And no,
That's different than talking about that racism exists. We should absolutely be teaching what racism is, that it exists, instances of it,
Okay,
absolutely.
we're not debating back and
I'm
forth.
done.
Okay, let's move on with Ms. Henderson Myers has a question, and then Mr. McGinnis has a question.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Dr. Long, I know you had mentioned something about your background in the beginning. Can you remind us again what your background is?
I'm in teacher education, so I've been at USC for 25 years.
Okay,
And prior to that, I was an elementary school teacher and a mom.
okay. And so you're teaching now?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us whether or not there's been any discussion amongst teachers about these bills?
Teachers that I've had conversations with are worried about them. You know, they're concerned that it's going to close down their opportunities to do what you were, so nicely saying, broadening the curriculum.
And do you feel that that's gonna, if we pass these bills, that it might have a chilling effect on our ability to retain and recruit teachers?
I do. Our pre-service teachers are worried about it. What's going to happen when I go out there? Those are the teachers in training, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. All right. And so, do you feel like this should be a priority given the, especially the teacher shortage that we have?
A priority to
pass these bills?
to not pass these bills.
Yeah, right. Okay, it's a
Yes,
priority
I do.
not
I
to
think it
pass.
will have an impact, definitely.
And so, based upon your experience and being a present teacher, what do you perceive as the priorities that this committee should be focusing on?
I think focusing on opening possibilities for a broadened curriculum, like I talked about before, so that we really are engaging teachers in the process of growing curriculum as we grow in our knowledge of our histories, our contemporary issues, and so on. And teachers are wonderful at that. I mean, we create curriculum with teachers all the time, and they dive in and get busy, and I think encouraging that would be really exciting.
Thank you.
Representative McGinnis, question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And there is a question at the end of what I'm about to say. I feel like I've had the right to remain silent today. Apparently, I just don't have the ability, so that's why I'm chiming in here. I think that I think we can all agree, or somewhat agree, that the definition of CRT is about as clear as mud. And we have a lot of work to do in defining some of these things. What interested me about the conversation, though, and I was a journalist in my former life, and I talked about this in another meeting, is that I worked for 25 years to try to tell people complicated stories without showing bias, to the point that when I got out and I announced I was running for office and I was a Republican, a Democrat friend of mine said, "You are?" I really prided myself on that. And I believe that education should be that way and teachers should be that way. You shouldn't know who that teacher voted for. Yeah, you might be able to have an interesting conversation around it, but for all intents and purposes, that's not a teacher's job to tell people how to vote or how to think. Sure. It's to create a conversation. And that's what I really want to see come out of this is, and I think it's tough because we don't want to punish teachers. We don't want to threaten teachers. Gosh knows they're already facing enough trouble in the classroom as it is. However, I think having something in code, something there that reinforces the idea that there's not to be bias in the classroom. And as somebody who educates teachers and somebody who obviously knows a lot more about education than myself and probably most of the other people sitting up here, I think my question to you is it that bad of us to think about trying to get bias out of the classroom? Not just racism, not just anything else, but just bias bias in general. And I know it's a tough one because this is some pretty heady stuff here. So that's my question.
Honestly, I think you need to trust teachers. I mean, just like so many people have said today, we have remarkable teachers across this state. And now and then there's going to be a one-off where somebody injects something that's not appropriate. We heard a couple of examples today. And I love that some people talked about, well, let's deal with that at the principal's level, at the school level, or at the district level, one-to-one, rather than legislate something that impacts everyone. I know there was something that came up before about cameras in the classroom, and I think, so you have one or two teachers that have maybe done something that needs to be dealt with. It doesn't mean that then you're punitive or you legislate something that could possibly constrict every other teacher. So I would just be very careful with that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. One more question, Representative Rivers.
Yes, ma'am. My question, I think, is pertaining to history, and I'm just curious how in history we went from the human race to racism. I'm just curious how the term human race, now we got to racism, but then we say there's no supremacy, and I'm just trying to, reconcile how that could happen.
Well, I think it's all of the above. I think we're talking about the human race and racism at the same time. And that racism is something that we know that we have to deal with. We have to figure out how are we going to deal with that. And kids are noticing what's happening in their worlds all the time. So not dealing with it in the classroom means that, they come to school and wonder
Yes, ma'am.
whether it matters to us or not to be able to talk about it. So I think it's both. I think we're talking about both. I don't think there's been a time when there was a time when race was invented, but we won't go into that.
Yes, excuse me. You talked about the CRT and this new definition that has been invented. And I'm just curious if you think that the new CRT definition and this concern has anything to do with a deviation or a deflection from January 6th and some of the other things that's been going on.
Oh, I hadn't really thought about that. It could be, but I do just want to add that it's not a new CRT definition. It's a wrong CRT definition. It's not a definition of CRT. So that might be a good bottom line. Just
Thank you, ma'am.
Start with. Thank you.
Thank you so much.